going to talk. We've all been very inspired, and we've been encouraged, and we've been motivated, so we're not going to do any more of that. I'm going to do what I love to do the most, besides play the piano, and I'm going to teach you leadership. Now, what we're going to talk about for the next few minutes is the nuts and bolts stuff. And you know this as well as I do. I don't care what you've learned. And we've heard, I mean, good grief. It's just unbelievable. We just drank from a fire hydrant. But here's what you know as well as I do. You're going to take all these cool notes and all the stuff you did on with your thumbs and with your fingers and writing all the deal. And you're going to take the whole thing back into your organization, to your church, to your youth ministry, whatever it might be. And you're going to take all this information into a current system. And your current system has the potential, as it has many times, to crush your enthusiasm and to wring out of you all the inspiration and to make your cool ideas and all these new insights, make them look totally irrelevant. And you're going to show up by yourself or with 2 or 3 of your team members, and you're going to share your cool story in the staff meeting or in your organization, and they're just going to look at you and you're going to think, why aren't you as excited about this as I am? And it's because they're part of your current system. So for the next few minutes, I want to talk about systems. Now, this is not fun, and this isn't inspirational, but I'm just telling you, and most of you are intuitive enough to know, that this is the nuts and bolts stuff. This is the stuff we have to learn to deal with as leaders, and especially, I think, as church leaders. Now, every once in a while, I'm criticized. And by the way, I kind of like, some people like conflict, some people avoid it. I like it too much. I don't know where I got that. Maybe it's being a preacher's kid. But every once in a while, I'm confronted or challenged, and I love this, on the fact that our church, North Point, and what we're doing is too corporate, and we're just trying to take business models and apply them to the church, and God is spiritual, and business is not spiritual, and it's evil, and all that stuff. And I love to say, well, you know what? McDonald's and Coca-Cola have done pretty well with their Great Commission, right? So don't be so overtly critical and so quick to judge, because what I want to talk about for a few minutes is one of those things when I talk about people say, well, that's not spiritual. I mean, you're talking about systems. What about the spiritual side of things? So I just want to kind of head it off at the pass for just a minute. Did you know that before God created man, and fill in this blank for me, He created, and this is what we call it, He created the solar system. That when God created man and created the physical body, He created the most sophisticated system. Your body, and you know this, your body is so incredibly sophisticated that it's taken centuries and centuries for people who pay attention to that kind of stuff to figure it out. And because your body is a system, now I don't know that I explained this very well, because your body is a system, going to the doctor is meaningful. The reason going to the doctor when you're sick is meaningful is because your doctor understands how your body is supposed to be working, and whether it's a chemical thing, a blood thing, a foreign body thing, whatever it might be, your doctor, a good doctor, is able to say, based on how we know this system is supposed to work, we can tweak some things in you physically and make you healthy again. This is why when you get sick, you don't just pray. Because there's a systems issue, and somebody understands your physical body and your system. The same is true of every kind of system. Whether it's any part of nature, all of nature runs according to systems, including the solar system. God created systems, and He runs the universe through systems. So this is not an unspiritual, purely business approach to organization or leadership. This is a God thing. And your organization and your church is a conglomeration and a combination of multiple systems. And if you don't approach problem solving in your business or in your church systemically or systematically, you'll spend the rest of your career blaming people, firing people, being critical of human nature, and never getting to the root of what's wrong in your organization. Now, I'm just telling you, and I know this from personal experience, and again, many of you can stand up and tell your own story. When you go back to church or back to your business or back to whatever you're going back to with these new ideas, and you probably take notes at a conference like this like I do. I take notes of what the speaker is saying, and then I have another list of all the ideas I get while the speaker's talking. Do you do that? Don't you do that? That's what leaders do. And finally somebody's saying, what are you writing over there? Shh, I got an idea. Aren't you listening? No, I quit listening 10 minutes ago. I heard what I need to hear. I got an idea. In fact, I want to leave now. I mean, some of you just kind of checked out halfway through some of the talks because, oh my gosh, that's a great idea I just got at Catalyst Conference. And you're going to go running home like we all do, because I got a list. I got my list from the conference. And we run home, and we're so excited about implementing these things. And ideas don't seem to stick, do they? In fact, you're thinking of last year's conference or another conference you went to this year, and you're thinking, why is it my organization is no further along? Why is it my church hasn't changed any more than it has with all these new ideas? And we read the books, and here's why. Because if you don't learn to address things at the systems level, nothing changes. Now, I'm going to try to build my case as we go through these notes, and then I'm going to give you an exercise, and I'm very excited about this. We just did this with our staff, and it was so helpful, and we're going to continue to do this. I want to give you a very, very practical exercise at the end that you can go home and begin doing some of these things as you think about implementing change in your organization. So I hope that's worth fighting the traffic for. So if you have your notes, we'll fill in a few blanks, and then I'll kind of talk about some of this stuff as we go along. Number one under introduction, there are organizational systems that are conducive to ministry, and I'm talking out of my context, which is a ministry context, and if you're in business, you can make the transition. You know how to do that. There are organizational systems that are conducive to ministry and organizational systems that impede ministry. Isn't that true? There are organizational systems that make ministry or business easy, and there are systems that make you feel like you're treading through quicksand. Everybody's trying to get to the same place, but it's just so hard to get there. Number two, there are organizational systems that free leaders to lead, and there are organizational systems that obstruct leaders. If you're here today and you feel like an obstructed leader, could I just see your hand? Yeah, you got the energy, you got the horsepower, you got the ideas, you got the vision, and you show up in a board meeting or show up in a deacons meeting or an elders meeting or a staff meeting or whatever it is, and it's just like, how come we can't get any of this going? Everybody's nodding like, yeah, this is a great idea, but there's no traction. It's like running on ice. And it's not because you're not with good people. It's not because these people you work with don't love Jesus, but you're in a system that is anti-progress. You may be working in a system, as we're going to see in a minute, that's anti-leadership. At the below that, I gave you a definition kind of when I talk about system, here's what I'm talking about. This is a very simplified definition. This is not a full-blown definition, but you're smart enough to know what we're talking about. But just for the sake of definition, define a system is your organization's approach to getting things done. Your organization's approach to getting things done. In other words, this is how you do things around the office. This is how you do things in your ministry and business. And let me tell you once again why this is so important. Listen, if you're a youth pastor, and you're one of those men or women, you think, one day I'm not always going to work with students, one day I'm going to get to work with adults. And you look around your church and you think like I used to think, boy, when I'm in charge, one day, someday, right? Well, here's the deal. With all the ideas and all the energy and all the vision that you have as a student pastor, if you go into an existing system, and many of you who are senior pastors, this is exactly what happened to you. If you go into an existing system with all the creativity and all the energy of youth ministry, and you don't know that there's a systems issue, you will spend the good years of your life trying to make changes that never seem to stick. Because it's a systems issue, and you think all I need is vision, all I need is energy, all I need is creativity, all I need is a band. And nothing changes. Why? Because you never looked at the systems. Let's talk more about this. Hopefully this will get clearer as we go. Number one, systems, and this is rule number one. In fact, if you just got this one thing and left after this, there's so much packed into this one statement. Roman numeral 1, systems, here's why it's so important. Systems create behaviors. Would you just say that with me while you're filling that in? Systems create behaviors. One more time. Systems create behaviors. We just heard a great example of that. Was it 60% of black boys who don't finish high school end up in prison? Why is that? Because they are in family that are the sons or daughters, I guess, or sons of men and women who are incarcerated. I think it's the full statistic. That's because there is a system, a family system in place that creates a certain behavior among boys who grow up in those certain kinds of homes. That's why it's a statistic. That's why it's predictable. That's why it's an issue worth addressing. All of us in student ministry know all about this. Remember, you do like the most amazing series on Wednesday night, or you have the most amazing curriculum for Sunday morning, and you think, boy, we have thoroughly covered that subject, and after hearing these 4 lessons or 6 lessons, I'm sure our students will never, ever, ever again fill in the blank, or they will always and forever fill in the blank. I mean, you've illustrated it, exhausted it, you put music to it, you had a drama, you brought in an ex-somebody. I mean, you just loaded it on. I mean, you've given those kids so much information. And you're sure, I'm telling you, after this series, their lives are changed, right? Like the next week, you see them doing the very thing you spent 4 weeks and $20,000 trying to explain to them not to do, you know? And you're like, what happened? It's real simple. Talks don't create behaviors. Cool environments don't create behaviors. Systems create behaviors. If you're a senior pastor, you've had the same thing happen. You did like the most amazing series on marriage you've ever done. I mean, you read up on everything. You had great illustrations. You had team meetings. You let your wife share some of the secrets of your marriage. You told your story. You were authentic. You were transparent. You had somebody knock it out of the park with a closing song. Everybody cried, threw their stick in the fire, rededicated their lives, held hands, renewed the marriage vows. I mean, everybody wore white that day. I mean, it was just through rice. I mean, it was like so over the top. I mean, now the marriages in our church, by golly, we got strong marriages. 2 weeks later, you and your wife are like in a fight, And then you hear about it, some of your best friends struggling, somebody else is getting a divorce, and a year later you look back and there's no difference in the marriages in your church. Why? Because preaching, and I hate to admit this, preaching does not create behaviors. Systems create behaviors. My third illustration in your notes is so relevant. Western versus Middle Eastern. I mean, you can't admit this, so I'll admit it for you. You watch the news like I do, and you look at all the stuff going on all over the world, and every once in a while, in your very simplistic way, and I'll admit it's very simplistic, we have thoughts like this. Why don't those people just get a clue? Just knock it off. I just need to go over there and have a meeting with them. I say, can everybody listen for a second? Okay, would you just quit killing each other? It's really simple. Look into my eyes. Don't shoot your neighbor. I mean, isn't it that simple? Sure it is, if you look at the problem through the lens of our system. But if you live and were brought up in that system, listen to me, this is important. Their behavior makes perfect sense. Because systems impact behaviors. Now, those are big, broad illustrations. Here's where it lands with us in church world. The Baptist church is a system. It creates certain behaviors. That's why I can be around somebody about 15 minutes ago. Are you Baptist? And they say, well, brother. And you say, I knew it, right? Hey, you can be around Methodist. And you kind of know. Now, you're not Methodist. You wouldn't have done that, okay? You're not. Just kidding. You're a certain brand of Methodist. You're a catalyst Methodist. That's right. There you go. Or you can be around Presbyterians, and they can't help but be a part of their system. It just kind of goes. Or I have so many friends who are Catholic. I mean, all my buddies that are kind of my age that are outside of my church circles, I meet through sports and all the stuff in our community. Most of them are Catholic. It's so funny. I start meeting people, I think, I bet they're Catholic. How do I know? You know what? Because religious systems, denominational systems create behaviors. The reason the people in your churches act the way they do is because they've been in a system that has created those kinds of behaviors. In fact, speaking of Methodist, I have a dear friend. I've known 2 people in this category, but one's a really close friend who have very successful Methodist churches, very successful. And this one guy I was able to have this conversation with, I said, what's the deal? Because you don't do anything like Methodist, but you have this big church. He says, well, what we did is we just broke all the rules and do everything different. We've been so successful, they leave us alone. They hold us up as a model in terms of, impacting the community, but they don't want anybody to do what we do because basically we break all the rules. We don't run the game plan. So what do? Listen what they did, church leaders. They decided they wanted a different kind of behavior from their Methodist. So they implemented different systems which created different kinds of behaviors, which, they just blew their church up in a good way. Because systems create and impact behaviors. And all of us that work in church world are working in some sort of system. Most of us inherited it. A few of us willingly adopted it. And then a few of us had the opportunity to actually create it. Letter B. The system that you inherit, adopt, or create will eventually impact, now this is so huge, listen to this, will eventually impact what staff and volunteers do. The system you inherit, adopt, or create will eventually impact what staff and volunteers do. This is an undercurrent in every one of our organizations. This is a stream that runs below the surface. This is something that's happening right now in your organization. And because we don't understand this, when something goes wrong, we immediately blame people. Well, she's just no good. He's no good. He didn't do what I said. She didn't tell me the truth. He didn't listen to me. She wasn't paying attention. They don't have the vision. But you know what? I would bet 80% of your people problems are not people problems. They are system problems, because systems create behaviors. And oftentimes there is such a huge disconnect between mission and vision and systems, and guess which wins? The system. We'll talk about that in just a minute. For example, I gave you some examples from our world. I put invest and invite. One of our core values are basically our whole evangelism strategy at North Point, Buckhead, and Brownsbridge Church, and all of our strategic partners. Our whole evangelism strategy is summed up in these three words: invest and invite. That is, you invest your life in the life of an unbeliever, and at the appropriate time, you invite them to an environment where they will hear the gospel. That's it. That's our whole thing. Invest and invite, invest and invite. And one of the invest and invite destinations for us is our worship service on Sunday morning. Our people just invite people all the time. So church leaders will come and they say, Andy, listen to the question. How do you get people to invite their friends to church? How do you get people to invite their friends to church? My people won't invite people. Your people are better than my people. How do I get my people to be like your people? To which I always say, first of all, I don't have any people, okay? I don't even like that terminology. I don't have people. But the whole thing is, wait a minute, why is it that your people invite people to church and I can't get my people? Andy, how can I get my people to invite people to church? Well, I'll tell you how you don't do it. You've all tried this, right? You don't get up and say, now look, you need to invite your friends to church, okay? I told them, God, I told those people, God, take me to a different church where the people love you. You know how I've tried to get these people to be obedient and tell their friends about Jesus. God, I told them and I told them and I told them. What's wrong with these people? Nothing wrong with the people. Let me tell you about your church. I've never been there. Let me tell you all about it. If people, this is simple. This is hard. It's hard to do, simple to understand. If people in your church don't invite their unchurched friends to church, it's because you have a system that has not created that kind of behavior. An announcement won't get it done. A video won't get it done. A sad story won't get it done. You've got to create a system that creates the behavior of inviting unchurched people to church. In fact, it's interesting. Monday, this is a crazy week for me. Monday, I'm taking our leadership team off for a couple days. And for 2 days, we're going to discuss the guest experience at North Point, Brownsbridge, and Buckhead Church. That's what we're going to do for 2 days. We're going to just discuss, take apart, tear apart, look at our systems and ask, what's going on with our guest experience? You talk about a great discussion. You should have this. How can we make our guest experience better? Because you know what we've discovered? If you have a great guest experience, which is a combination of systems, parking, hallways, signage, leadership, all that kind of stuff, if you have a system that creates a great guest experience, guess what your people do? They invite guests. There's a thought. You see, I'm telling you, the reason people invite people to our services, we've created systems that generate that kind of behavior. I don't think I've ever in 12 years stood up and said, now look, you guys, You need to invite your friends. What's wrong with you? Don't you have any lost friends? You know, you just don't have to do that. Okay, look, second illustration, I know I got to move along, is groups. This is amazing. I just found out this week that one of my good friends stood up in a conference and said that groups, talking about adult small groups, that groups don't work. Groups don't work. Here's what I thought. Groups don't work in your church. Groups don't work in your church because you don't have a system that creates a group's mentality. Pastors say, Andy, how do you get your adults to go into homes during the week? And then I hear this, and maybe you've heard it or said it, and this just drives me crazy. Our people won't do that. Like they're from a different country. Our people, these are people in the same city as us. Like we have this group where everybody has a number, and the number determines where you go to church, and you have to go there. Those are your people, these are mine. Our people won't do that. How do you get people to go be a part of a small group? It's simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. You create systems that create that kind of behavior. That's what you do. And here's the good news. You can do that. You can create those kinds of systems. I'm going to give you a clue a little bit later on how to do that. Other illustrations, volunteers. I mean, all of us need more volunteers, right? How do you get volunteers? And people always ask, how do you get so many volunteers? I love this one. How do you get men to teach children? How do you get teenagers to serve on Sunday morning? My son's 15 years old. I just love this. And Reggie, I just give the credit of all this to Reggie Joyner. He created all these incredible children's systems in our church. And again, you need to go to the Orange Conference because that's where he talks about how do you create these systems and tweak the systems in your church. But he created this incredible system, and part of it is a system called Student Impact, where our high school students serve on Sunday morning instead of going to Sunday school. My 15-year-old teaches a group with first graders. Him and his buddy, they're both 15 in the 9th grade, teach first graders on Sunday morning, and they don't want to miss. In fact, tonight they're going to this big event at church where all their small groups are coming together. He's 15 years old. He can't wait. He's in the 9th grade. He's very normal. He can't wait to go and be a part of this event. Now, how do you get your 9th graders to want to be serving children? How do you get your men? Hey, the answer is simple. You create a system that creates that kind of behavior among people. You say, oh, Andy, you're not really answering the question. Yes, I am, because your temptation will be to go home and fire your children's director. Because you're not getting it done. Your temptation will be to go home and get your student pastor and say, look, I heard Andy talk about this deal. Go find out what they're doing at North Point, and you do that. I want to see these children. No, that's not how you do it. You step way, way back, and you have a discussion about, I'm going to tell you how in just a minute. You have a big, broad discussion about what are we doing to create the kinds of behaviors we want. And here's a better question. We'll get to it in a minute as well. What are we doing that generates the kind of behaviors we're asking people not to participate in? Keep going. Anytime you hear, I think this is in your notes. Anytime you hear, well, our people just won't, you're listening to someone who doesn't understand the influence of systems. Our people just aren't committed. No, you just haven't captured their commitment. Our people just won't worship. No, you just haven't created a system conducive to worship. Our people won't serve. No, you just haven't created a context that just drives them and motivates them to serve. Letter D, components of a system. The best way to understand this, I don't think this is in your notes. If you just write the word family, it's easy to understand what a system is, because all of you live in a system. It's a family system. And the best way to understand systems organizationally is to think family. For example, here's 5, there's more than this. Here's the kind of the key or critical components of any system. Number 1 are expectations, or the rules, expectations, you fill in that blank. 2 is rewards or lack of. In your organization, certain things are rewarded, certain things are punished, and certain things are neglected. Number 3, consequences or the lack of. In your organization, there are consequences for certain things, and there are no consequences for other things. Those kinds of things impact the system, whether they're obvious or not. Number 4, the communication. There's a communication style and content in terms of how are things communicated. I'm not talking about the communicator. I'm talking about within your organization in terms of how do you do things. There is a way that information is communicated, and there's a style in which it's communicated that shapes your system. Then number 5, the behavior or the behavioral patterns of the people in charge. The behavior of the behavioral patterns of the people in charge. I wrote in my notes, I guess this is a good idea. If you would like a starting point, I'm going to give you a better exercise in a minute, but if you like a starting point for this discussion, maybe in the van ride home or for the next 3 hours while you're sitting in traffic, you can go ahead and start this conversation, get some folks on the cell phone. Here's a great conversation to have with your staff. Look at those 5 things and answer the question. What are the expectations in our organization? What are the clear expectations? This is huge. You listening? Senior pastors, listen up. What do we reward in our organization? Here's a principle for you. What's rewarded is repeated. What's rewarded is repeated. I don't care what you ask people to do, they will do what you reward. I don't care what you command people to do, I don't care what's in your policy handbook. What's rewarded is repeated. One of the things you need to understand about your organization, both with volunteers and staff, is what are we intentionally or what are we unintentionally rewarding? Because that is shaping the culture and the system of your organization. The consequences, the communication, the behavior of those in charge. Letter E, systems have a greater impact on organizational culture than do mission statements. I'm all for mission statements. Systems trump mission statements 100% of the time, because your mission statement is hanging on the wall. Your systems are happening down the hall. What's happening down the hall trumps what's hanging on the wall every single time. And you know what? You need to have a mission statement. But here's another staff retreat to have. How do we align the behaviors of the staff with the mission? And the answer isn't to fire the staff and get better people. You've already got great people. You know what they're doing? There's another thing I know about your church, okay? Your staff is doing exactly what you have led and rewarded them to do. That's what your staff is doing. They're doing exactly what you have led and rewarded them to do. And if you've led them to do something intentionally or unintentionally, or if you've rewarded them in such a way that they're doing something that you don't want them to do, the problem is in the mirror. The problem isn't in the people that you've hired. But our first line of response when things don't go well is to blame people. Most of the time, it's not people. It's a system. If you're, again, the best way to think of it is in terms of family. We had this issue at home. My kids don't have many chores. One of them's to take the garbage can down to the street. Whoa, Okay, our driveway is about 220 feet long. We'd live way off the street, So that's not like an easy thing, and it's kind of a hill. So they're supposed to be out there Thursday night, so what do? We go into this routine. Have y'all taken the trash cans down? No. You got to take the trash? No. I don't want to have this conversation. So now what have I done? I remind them, they take it down. I remind them, they take it down. I remind them, I take it down. They take it down, take the trash down. And then I sit alone going, what's wrong with these kids? I have to remind them. Don't they understand how God's blessed them to put them in a family like this one, and we are so good to them, and they got everything they want, and they got iPods, and they got, these ungrateful kids. If they really love me and love Jesus, I wouldn't have to remind them. They would just wake up in the morning and say, oh, what a privilege. We get to take that trash down to the street. These kids, I'm trading them in. I'm going to get some good kids. Do you know why they only take the trash down after I remind them? Because that's the system I created. If you were to ask one of my kids, hey, how does the chore thing work? Oh, here's how it goes. My dad asked us once. We pretty much ignore that. Then he asked us a second time. We pretty much ignore that. Then he starts to get mad, and then we take the trash down. That's how it works in our family. Well, who created that incredible system? Oh, Dad came up with that himself, all by himself. We just follow along. That's how we do it in our home. Now you laugh. There's 100 examples of that in your organization. You're so frustrated with her. She's doing exactly what you led and rewarded her to do because you're the boss. So you know what we did at home? I finally said, all right, guys, we're changing the system. Here's how it works. Well, here's what I did. I drove home one day. Trash wasn't down. I thought, okay, Systems problem. I'm blaming boys. I'm blaming, some people, and then I'm making the second mistake. Then I'm blaming human nature. First of all, it's like my boys, there's something wrong with my boys. Second line of defense, well, they're teenagers. That's just how teenagers are. So that's what you do. You blame people or you blame human nature. And I realized that, come on, Andy, you're smarter than that. It's a systems thing. So I went up, parked the car, got the trash cans, took the first trash can down, walked all the way back up the driveway, got the second trash can, taking it down. Andrew comes and says, what are you doing? I said, I'm taking trash down. Well, thanks. Not a problem. Happy to do it. I get your allowance. It's not a problem, Andrew, really. It's good. It's at dinner that night. He said, were you serious about the allowance thing? I said, oh, yeah, Garrett, you and Andrew, I got your allowance. Andrew, you pay me this week. I get their allowance. In fact, I'm going to get your allowance. Every week I do your chores. Not a problem. You don't ever have to take the trash down again if you don't want. It's not an issue. Problem solved. I don't have to ask, wait. I'm not a brilliant parent. It took me like 4 years to figure that out, Here's my point. Listen. Somewhere in your organization with volunteers and staff, you are accidentally rewarding the wrong thing, and then you're complaining about it when they act on what you reward. Now I'm telling you, you can't sit here and solve this. This is not a commitment you make. And I'm so glad I learned that. No. These are big, bold, hairy, long, multi-day discussions you have as a staff. Changing systems organizationally is very, very difficult. But listen, nothing changes unless you deal with change at this level. Number one, I don't know where we are. Number one, yeah, there we go. We did this already. Number one, this principle explains why it's so difficult to transition an organization or a church, whatever it is. This is why it's so difficult. Some of you pastors come in, and come on, again, there's so many stories. You come in, you're the new pastor, they're so excited. We have so many problems here. You're going to come change them, and we promise to give you money and buy you a car, and you have freedom. You can do whatever you want to, pastor. We just want change. We want change. And then you come in and start trying to bring about change, and nothing changes. Everywhere you push, there's resistance. Why? Because you've come in with a new mission or vision, but nobody's addressed the systems. Number two, if a new leader cast a new vision and never addresses old systems, nothing changes. Hey, listen, if you're a denominational leader, I hope you're listening. Not because I'm smart and not because I'm talking, but because this is true. And you know this, hundreds, in some cases thousands, in some cases tens of thousands of people who love God and are serving in your churches, and they're trying to run your game plan. And your game plan is broke. And they're trying to be obedient, and they're trying to do the deal, but you've created a system that doesn't create the behaviors they want. And this is why church planning is so in vogue. Come on, I don't blame you, I did it. I didn't have time to fix something. I'm no good at fixing something. It's just easier to go out and create your own problems, right? I mean, I don't want to inherit somebody else's problems. I don't want to go spend 10 years of my life trying to address a system that nobody even can tell me what the system is. This is why people want to plant churches. Who can blame them? I mean, you'd rather have 2 jobs. You'd rather live in a smaller house and drive an older car. But at least at the end of the day, you get to create your own systems. But you know what? If you're in a position of leadership denominationally, or you have influence within a denomination, listen, this is such a passion. One of the greatest things you could do for the next generation of church leaders is to be bold and to be courageous and to say it's broke, it doesn't work, it needs to be changed, and to just spend this next season of your life creating the kinds of systems that allow leaders to lead. And I'll make you a promise. You create a context in which leaders are free to lead, and guess who flock? Leaders. Because leaders want to lead, and we have very little patience with systems that won't allow us to lead. We either rebel and get out of the ministry, or we go our own way and do something different. And you know what? I thank you, sir. I appreciate that. You know what? Listen. I got to get back to the notes. Listen. No, listen. I know. We don't want to waste our life, right? We don't want to waste time. And there's some of you in this room, you have so much influence. And if you would just be a little bolder, a little more courageous, If you would just leverage your influence a little bit more, you might create some space and some margin for the leaders who are dying to make a difference in this world, but they are not going to waste their time in life doing stuff that doesn't work, or waste their time in life trying to fix things that people don't want fixed. Number 2, Roman numeral 2, the New Testament, you know this, the New Testament does not present us with a comprehensive system or model. I guess you know this, you should know this. The New Testament does not present us with a comprehensive system or model. In the New Testament, we discover what the early church did. That's all we do there. We discover what the early church did. The New Testament does not lay out a comprehensive plan instructing church leaders what to do. Now, you may disagree with that, and that's okay. I could be wrong. This is just my opportunity to talk, okay? But this is important. In the New Testament, we don't find out how to do all this. It's a mistake to assume we do, and here's why. And just this little sidebar, little Bible sidebar. In the New Testament, in the first century, they had something we don't have. See, they didn't have to wear WWJD bracelets. They just went and said, hey, Peter, what would Jesus do? And they knew, because he was there. He saw him do it, right? Hey, John, what do you think Jesus would do? I'll tell you what he did. I'm standing there. They had the apostles. We don't, now again, you may think you have apostles. You may think you are an apostle, just a little bit different theological bent. The apostles are gone. We've named buildings